Hi, thanks for tuning in. You're back on the France 24 debate. This is part 2 of the debate, and we're going to ask this half hour where Russian democracy stands today, 20 years after the fall of the Soviet Union. Vladimir Putin is facing an unprecedented wave of protests with tens of thousands of people hitting the streets again on Saturday. Protesters are calling for a Russia without Putin. Observers have described this as an awakening. Ordinary Russians who suddenly don't want to put up with Putin's political system. Now, we're going to be looking at this and answering these questions with my guests today, Andrei Grachev, who's the Paris correspondent for Novaya Gazeta, and importantly, you are the former spokesperson of Mikhail Gorbachev. You just wrote a book, in fact, called Gorbachev's Gamble, which came out recently. To my left, we have Oleg Koptsev, historian and geographer at the American University of Paris. And joining us from Moscow by satellite, we have Maria Lipman, editor-in-chief of Pro et Contra Journal at the Carnegie Moscow Center think tank. Maria, thank you for joining us from Moscow. And we also have a Skype connection with John Laughlin, who's currently in Bath in the UK. John, you're a director of studies at the Institute of Pro-Democracy and Cooperation in Paris. Now, take a look at the front page of a newspaper that was published very recently. It's the newspaper The New Times. And you'll see among those faces, you might recognize Gaddafi, you might recognize Hosni Mubarak, you might recognize President Ben Ali. And bottom right is Vladimir Putin. And the front page says The Reckoning. In other words, this newspaper is perhaps anticipating a fall of Vladimir Putin, who could be a victim of this protest movement. And just as the debate ended, there was a disagreement on the extent of the voter fraud during December's general elections, with John Laughlin in the UK was telling us that the voter fraud is official and should not be the subject of speculation on the part of protesters. But we had several people, Maria in Moscow, disagreeing, as well as Andrei Grachev. You wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, well, I would like to engage here the big debate about whether there was or not fraud during the elections, because that would mean also to engage in the debate the opinion of the Russian President Medvedev, who accepted and recognized that there were, as he's saying, irregularities, and who said that he had ordered the investigation into this fraud. But just commenting to what we've heard from John Laughlin, I would just want to ask him, does he believe in figures like 95% of approval of United Russia Party in several northern Caucasian republics, with 99% of participation? Doesn't remind it to him, I mean, these kind of figures, some figures were accustomed to hear during the Brezhnev or even Stalin type times, or Northern Korean figures quite recently.
John, did you hear that?
Yes, I did. On the face of it, obviously, such figures invite a great deal of skepticism, but that's not my point. I'm not denying that there may have been fraud here and there. What I'm saying is that the scale of it is minor. It's extremely minor, because the official results of the election correspond to almost to the decimal point. Not exactly, because of course they were different polls, but they correspond very, very closely to all the major polls, which all showed that United Russia could expect between 48 and 53% of the vote. So the idea that somehow the official result diverges widely from the true preferences of the electorate is wrong.
Maria Lipman in Moscow, you also disagreed with that assertion that John Laughlin just made.
Yes, indeed. And actually, the fraud was distributed unevenly in Russia, with North Caucasus being one of the examples, but this is a relatively small part of the electorate. And now Moscow, the capital, accounts for about 10% of the electorate. And here the fraud was really massive. And here we have the result of the exit poll, which said that 26% went to United Russia, the chief pro-Kremlin force, actually Putin's party. And the event eventual result reported was 46%. Also, it is in Moscow where observers were especially active, and they have reported countless instances of ballot stuffing, of being kicked out from the polling station when they were too insistent on pointing out to the irregularities, and of all other, a variety of other instances of fraud. It is also not accurate what John said that actually rallies are not roughed up in Russia. They are, and the most recent ones were on December 5 and 6, two smaller rallies, one of about 10,000 and the other of about 2. Now, in the 2,000 rally on December 6 in Moscow, about 600 people were arrested and quite a few of them were beaten. And state television did not even report that those rallies took place. And this is my objection to the point about freedom of the press. Now, the government has made concessions, and the two mass rallies, the one on December 10 and the one on December 24, were broadcast. And this is exactly what points to the weakening of the Kremlin now and to a gradual loss of legitimacy of this regime.
Now, I want to put a question to Mr. Andrei Grachev, who, of course, is not just an observer of Russian political history, but was 20 years ago an actor of Russian political history. We said you were the former spokesperson, Mikhail Gorbachev. You worked for him until the very last day, even in fact until the next day. You organized the very last press conference, his very last meeting with the journalists, during which he announced that he would no longer be president of the Soviet Union. 20 years on, is this what you had hoped for? Is this what you expected, the state of Russian democracy today under Vladimir Putin?
Well, first thing is, I think it's symbolic event that 20 years ago we are observing in Moscow at present the scale of demonstrations and the activism of important part of its population, which should be comparable to the events of 20 years ago, the events of 89, of 1990 and 1991. It's obvious that the hopes of perestroika...
You would compare the importance of the street protests
absolutely.
Today with what was going on 20 years ago.
Absolutely. You haven't seen the manifestations, public demonstrations of this kind in Moscow since the period of perestroika. And that is one of the reasons why I'm calling the events that take place now in Moscow, first of all, but also in a great number of Russian cities, because the demonstrations which were protesting against the fraud and the falsification of the results of the elections took place in more than 80 cities across Russia. So, to a certain extent, from my point of view, we are going back to where the perestroika project has been cut short by the dissolution of the Soviet Union and by Gorbachev's resignation.
And perestroika, just a reminder of viewers, was the general process movement that was begun by Mikhail Gorbachev that aimed to modernize and streamline the Communist Party and the functioning of the Soviet Union.
It's important.
Modernize and democratize.
Yeah, it's important to remind that the last elections, but at that time they were true, fair and transparent elections, took place during Gorbachev's time in 1989. And that was recognized universally. That was the reason why those elections gave such unexpected results, why they brought to the forefront of the Soviet policy at that time new faces and new figures. And to a certain extent, we are now back to the starting point, or to the, let's say, to the point where this process, this very promising process of democratization of the Russian society, which was launched with perestroika, was interrupted by the events that took place in 1991.
But so Mikhail Gorbachev initiated a process of change that ended up sweeping him away. Would you say, Oleg Koptsev, that we are experiencing a similarly important watershed moment in the politics of Russia again today?
Well, I personally believe in evolution and not revolution. I think there's what we see are episodes where history is accelerating. Suddenly it seems like it's almost getting out of control when indeed Gorbachev was swept away by a process that he himself helped to initiate. He helped history evolve. It went too fast. I think he just completely lost control because of the pace of change. Then we had chaos under Yeltsin, a very, very difficult time of transition where he himself was in great difficulty in controlling whatever resulted from this sudden acceleration of history. And we have, it's been slow, the evolution slowed down with Putin. Putin, I think, will be remembered as somebody who tried to take the reins of the horse of history again, try to control the situation, because that's what it's all about. This Putin era is about regaining control. Some kind of certain groups in power, certain elites are trying to regain control of the situation. I think that what's happening now is simply we're going to see a normal pace. I don't want to say like Mr. Laughlin, big deal. This is it's not much what is happening in the streets, but I do believe that it's more the sign, it's not the sign of a revolution that is happening. It's the sign of a country becoming normal. We're progressively moving towards a democratic regime. How will it happen? There will be setbacks, there will be moments of crisis at times, but I think that simply in the long term, we're just progressing towards a more normal, almost Western type of regime.
John Laughlin,
I'm not entirely sure that Putin is entirely against that, by the way. How fast he wants it to happen, Единая Россия, the party of Putin, United Russia, there's lots of different elements there also, and so we'll see also how these elements, how Putin himself will try to find compromises with the opposition, or what you called very well this new civil society that is emerging, and especially the younger generation.
John Laughlin, how would you chart the development, the evolution of Russian politics since the fall of the Soviet Union?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say I do agree with Oleg, the last speaker. I think that Russia is evolving. And that's why I find all this talk about fraud completely unintelligible. After all, the results that have been announced are completely in line with what you would expect in terms of a powerful party having been in power and losing votes after a difficult period.
John, so we've mentioned and we've debated this question of electoral fraud. I'd really like to move on to your historical view of, after 12 years in power, how Vladimir Putin has steered the Russian boat.
Well, I personally think he steered it pretty well, but clearly there is, he's been in power for a long time. People are fed up. This is this is totally normal. This is indeed, as Oleg says, it's a totally normal development. That's why I think that the evolution is a good one. I think where Russia remains weak is in her opposition leaders, because if people denounce United Russia for being hegemonic and so on, the fact is that the opposition leaders, Zyuganov particularly and Zhirinovsky, who are the main winners in these elections, these people have been at the head of their respective parties for far too long. And I think it's time now that there was a bit of new blood in the opposition, never mind in the government.
All right, well, to most outside observers, hearing that just at a time when Vladimir Putin is getting ready to be re-elected, it could sound a little strange. In fact, here's the advice that he's getting from Mikhail Gorbachev himself, who has been obviously a keen observer of this protest movement recently.
I would advise Vladimir Putin to go. He's had 3 terms, 2 as president, 1 as prime minister. 3 terms. It's enough.
So, John, Mr. Gorbachev certainly is calling on renewal of the political elite, but within the United Russia Party, and he's calling on Vladimir Putin to step down. I want to ask Maria Lippman in Moscow whether political change concrete political change seems like it could happen as a result of these of the protest movement that we've been seeing.
Yeah, well, I would like to add a little bit about Gorbachev. In those days, 20 years ago and 20-something years ago, when Gorbachev actually gave his people freedom. And that were the years of really inebriating joy, the joy of liberty. People responded to Mikhail Gorbachev's gift to them. And then he was indeed swept away by history, and he lagged behind the development of history in those days, not least because he himself would not stand for a popular election. I think that was his mistake, and that was an illustration of how he could not catch up with the developments. Now, the difference between the crowd in Moscow today and the crowd of 20 years ago is that the people of today did not wait for a split of the Russian political elites, which was what happened under Gorbachev. He led the progressive members of the elite and effectively split the Communist Party into hardliners and progressists. This time around, the political elite is still whole, at least on the surface it is. However, people did not wait for a sanction. They did not wait for an authorization to take to the streets and to demand what they see is right for their country. As for the possibility of change today, the government already is making small concessions, however, showing very little desire to talk with the people, to actually make these concessions and make political change a product of negotiations, a product of the actual feedback with the people, something that Putin's government has refrained from quite dramatically during the 10 years in power, pushing people farther and farther from decision making. There is a chance for change, and there is indeed a chance for an evolution, but this is only a change. The government is facing a dilemma whether to crack down. It still has all the resources of use of force, the resources of the budget, all the resources are in the hands of the Kremlin, in the hands of Putin still. And the other opportunity, the other option is to really try and open the Russian political system and bring back political competition that existed in Russia in the 90s and that Putin put an end to. All of this is a chance, but there is no chance of a status quo. The regime is clearly losing legitimacy. Putin's ratings are down. People are calling for his resignation. And it is very symbolic and really a pleasure to see that Mikhail Gorbachev actually was invited to the rally to be a speaker and to talk to the young people.
Okay, Maria, we're out of time, but thank you very much. And obviously, we'll continue to observe this situation and the developments in Russia right now. It was a pleasure for us to welcome all our guests, Andrei Gratchev, Oleg Koptsev, Maria Lipman in Moscow, and John Laughlin by Skype. Thank you very much to all our guests for being with us. Thank you for watching the France 24 debate. Do stay tuned. More news coming up. Bye-bye.